Hey, Chris Seiter here from Ex-Boyfriend Recovery, and today I'm going to be talking about if you can expect your ex to come back to you. Now, one of the things that you may be wondering is if you even have a chance of getting your ex back. It's actually one of the most popular questions that I get on my website, on my podcast, and even on our YouTube channel. So what I've done to combat that question and give you an idea so that you're not wasting your time with your ex is actually put together a special quiz designed to help you understand if you have a chance or not of getting your ex back. So if you're interested in taking that quiz, it's really simple. If you're watching this on YouTube, all you have to do is simply look in the description link below the video. If you're listening to this on a podcast, just stop by our website and look for the quiz there. All right, let's begin.
Do exes always come back? It's one of the most popular questions that I get time and time again. So what I've decided to do is to actually answer that question right here, right now, to give you a definitive yes or no answer. But the more I thought about it and the more I unpacked this question, the more I thought it would be more interesting to not only answer the question of do exes always come back, but also to answer what has to be present in the equation for an ex to want to come back to you. Right? So the way I look at it is getting an ex back is kind of like a math problem, right? There's certain elements that need to be present, and if you don't have enough of a certain element, you'll fail. Right? Math is pretty cut and dry that way. 2 plus 2 equals 4. There's no other number you can plug into that equation to make that true. That's just the way it is. That's the way it will always be. The same thing kind of applies here with exes. Obviously, there's not 100% perfection with that line of thinking, but that can help you maybe understand using that analogy how you should be going forward. So first, let's answer the simple question of do exes always come back to you? Well, no, they don't. Exes don't always come back to you, but don't let that frighten you. Right? There's a lot that goes into making an ex want to come back to you. So let's cover what are the things that I think need to be present in order for an ex to want to come back to you. So the first thing I talk about with a lot of my coaching clients is the fact that there are actually 3 distinct points of time when it comes to an ex making a decision to come back to you. Right? The 3 points of time are pretty simple. The first point of time is what happens before the breakup itself. The second point of time is what happens in the breakup, actually during that breakup period. And the third point of time is what you do after the breakup, right? So you have these 3 points of time. Not all of them are created equally. In fact, if I'm going to weight these, I would say the 2 things that really matter the most is what happens before the breakup and also what you do after the breakup. There's really not a whole lot you can do actually regarding the breakup itself, but I have seen the breakup itself be very, very harmful to certain individuals. So if you're going to look ultimately at what kind of chance you have of getting your ex back or, what has to be present in the equation, you're going to look ideally at these 3 points of time. I have also found some miscellaneous things that we're going to talk about later, but for now, let's focus in on these 3 points of time. So what are these 3 points of time? Well, the first point is pretty simple. It's before the breakup. This is everything that happened before the breakup. And really, when I talk about before the breakup, that period of time, I'm talking about what was your relationship like, right? So the way I explain it to my coaching clients is there's always kind of a catalyst for when things go downhill. Things are really great, really great, really great, really great, and then something happens or some event will occur or you'll notice a change in your ex's behavior and you start to notice you start fighting more, arguing more, things just aren't as great anymore. The honeymoon period's clearly over. When is that catalyst? So let's just bear with me here and let's assume that you're in a relationship for 6 months. The first 4 months of that relationship are great. There's no fights. Everything's going really great. And then something happens. And the last 2 months of the relationship are awful. Well, in that case, when your ex thinks back on that particular relationship, when that particular ex is going to think back on it, they're going to probably think more of the good times than the bad times. Why? Because you have 4 months of good sort of criteria to draw upon and only 2 months of bad criteria to draw upon. Now let's take another analogy. Let's say that your ex is looking back at the breakup and you dated your ex for a year, right? The first 2 months were incredible, exhilarating, exciting, intense, just great altogether. The next 10 months were not. They were awful. They were everything that's wrong with the relationship. When that ex looks back on that experience in the relationship, they're probably not going to remember very fondly. Why? Because there's 10 months worth of data right there that is bad. So it's really hard to overcome, right? So that's one thing that you want to look at. Ideally, you're looking for a good split of where most of your time together was positive and not a lot of your time together was negative. That's the before the breakup time period. Let's actually talk about what things are like during the breakup. So again, there's not a lot to unpack here with during the breakup as a time period. Why? Because, well, number one, it already happened, which I suppose you could make the case for before the breakup. But number two is a lot of people say things they don't really mean during breakups. I've been on record saying that 95% of the time, I find that exes will lie to you about the real reason they want to break up with you. I don't love you anymore, and I'm just not ready for a relationship are two of the most common reasons for why they'll break up with you. And I've also found, interestingly enough, in success stories that it's total BS. Well, you know, you've heard that phrase, when emotions run high, logic runs low, and that's certainly the case of during the breakup as a time period. So I don't really put a lot of credence into during the breakup, but I have found that it can impact people negatively. I'll give you an example. Let's say that you and your ex are in a relationship and you go through a horrific breakup. I mean, this thing is really bad. Lamps are being thrown. You are yelling, police get called. And these are actually real things that I've heard clients tell me. That has more of an impact on someone when they're remembering the experience. So let's say that your ex is remembering this experience of the breakup with you and the police get called on the two of you because you are being so loud and your neighbors call the police. Your ex is going to think negatively about that. So ideally what we're looking for here is something that is kind of a normal breakup. Obviously normal is very difficult to define because every breakup is a little bit unique. But when I say normal, I'm more talking about there can be fighting, there can be mean things said, but it's not escalating to a point where police get called. Right, so that's during the breakup. The third and probably the most important point is actually what you do after the breakup. If I'm going to actually pick two of these time periods and say which of these are the most important, I'm going to pick, what things were like before the breakup, because that's going to be where a lot of the headwind of getting back together your ex is going to have to think about, and what you do with your time after the breakup. And it is possible to completely screw your chances up by not doing what you're supposed to do after the breakup. There's a client that I've been dealing with recently that should have had their ex back. Me and my wife have worked with this person a lot, and this person has everything going for them. They should be able to get their ex back, but for whatever reason, they just don't have the discipline or the mentality or kind of what it takes necessarily to get their ex back at this point of time. They keep shooting themselves in the foot time and time and time again. They're not using the time after the breakup very wisely, right? So that is one of the most important points. And actually, when you come to our website, Ex-Boyfriend Recovery, we focus mostly on this point of time, because this is the point of time that you have some measure of control over. Think about it. You have no control over the past. You can't go back and change what happened during your relationship. You can't go back and change how you acted during the breakup. But what you can change is how you act after the breakup, which is why I say focus most of your energy on this. It is important to understand more so, how you handled the breakup itself and what things were like before the breakup. But more than anything, you're only going to be able to make inroads in this period of time. So in addition to that, through lots of research and talking to lots of different success stories, I've actually found 3 miscellaneous things that really can impact your chances of getting your ex back, or really have to be present if your ex is going to want to come back. So don't just focus on those 3 periods of time and think, oh, okay, I've got all of these things covered. That's it. No, I've also found that these 3 things seem to be present in the equation in which exes want to come back, right? So what are these 3 things? Well, the first thing, and don't worry if you're a little intimidated by the look of this list, because I don't expect you to know it until after this video, article, or podcast episode is over, right? So the first thing is moving on without moving on. Again, I'm going to reiterate exactly what all of these things in depth are after I get through this list. Number 2, positioning and timing. And finally, number 3, the importance of the internal conversation happening in your ex's mind. You may have heard me talk about this a lot. Don't worry, I'm going to reiterate. So from the top, let's talk a little bit about what these things can do for you and why they're important for the quote-unquote equation of getting or making an ex want to come back to you. So the first thing is moving on without moving on. I've noticed through lots of work with clients and also really on our private Facebook support group that it's really uncanny how often women or men will try to get their exes back. They'll fail to get their exes back, and then they'll give up on their exes. And it's only when they give up on their exes that their ex starts to realize that they're there, and their ex starts to quote unquote come back into the picture. And I've thought a lot about why this happens, and I think after years and years of studying it and trying to understand, I think it revolves around a number of factors. Number 1 is a lot of the process of trying to get an ex back is kind of like playing hard to get. We're going to talk a little bit about positioning and timing in a few minutes, but the cusp of the strategy is you're playing hard to get. You're using things like the no contact rule to position yourself properly. The problem is oftentimes when we're dealing with our clients, they want their exes back so bad they're willing to do anything, and whether they believe it or not, that exudes through. That aura gets picked up by their ex. When their ex picks up that aura, it gives them a sense of leverage. They think, I can get this person back whenever I want. And that's not appealing to them. I was giving this talk to a client the other day where I was explaining to this person that men and women in general tend to get bored if things are too easy. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, consider for a moment that you see a movie for the first time. This is a really good movie too. So you see this movie for the first time and you're excited and happy and you cannot believe how awesome this movie is. You see it again a day later or so. It's still awesome. It's still great. You still like it, but it's not the same as the first time you saw it. Then you see it 17 more times. Well, that 17th time that you see it, it's boring to you. You've seen it too much. You know what's going to happen. You've got all of the words memorized. The same thing kind of applies here when you're trying to get your ex back. If you're looking at what needs to be present in the equation, your ex needs to think that they aren't going to get you. They need to think that something new is going to occur. Because if you're talking to your ex, there's this sense of, oh, I've got her, or oh, I've got him. You need to find a way to remove that, and the only way to do that is moving on without moving on. Basically, focusing on moving on and feeling it internally so that you exude it externally. Hopefully that makes sense. Let's move on to the next thing, positioning and timing. So what do I mean by positioning and timing? Well, in my opinion, one of the things that needs to be present in the equation for an ex to want to come back into the picture is that you need to first be positioned properly and the timing needs to be right. These 2 things are essential elements that need to be present. So let's talk a little bit about them. What do I mean by positioning? Well, I think you cannot talk about positioning without timing and timing without positioning, right? So let's say that you are trying to get your ex back for 6 months and finally the time is right. The stars have aligned. Your ex is ready and open to wanting someone back, but they only view you as a friend. They don't view you romantically anymore. You've been essentially friend zoned. Well, okay, that's a scenario where the timing is right, but the positioning isn't, right? Then you have the scenario where maybe you've positioned yourself brilliantly, but things are happening a little too quickly. So you position yourself perfectly. Your ex is showing attraction in you. They are responding to your text messages, your overtures through phone calls, or even sometimes in dates perfectly. But they just won't take that step for that commitment. Why? Because maybe it's too soon after the breakup. Maybe it needs to be 6 months instead of 2 months before they're willing to commit to you. Positioning and timing are crucial elements, right? And what we've done throughout the history of ex-boyfriend recovery is actually study these two elements. Everything you can really look at, every article I've written, every book I've written is all focused on one of these two elements or both of these elements. I'll give you an example. The Texting Bible, the book I wrote to teach people basically how to text their exes after a breakup, focuses on positioning and those elements of timing involved in there. Now, how is timing involved in texting? Shouldn't texting be all about positioning? No, because when you text is almost as important as what you text. Think about that. So let's move on to the third element here, and that's the internal conversation happening in your ex's mind. So a lot of people don't realize this, but this is absolutely how it goes down. Think about the actual act of how an ex is going to take you back. They're not going to sit there and make their decision impulsively. Some of them do, but what you find is sometimes when an ex will make an impulsive decision to get back together with you, they'll end up backing out a few days later. Now, why? Why does this happen? Well, it happens because they talk themselves out of it in the internal conversation in their head. When they're alone, when they have time to process what actually happened, they start to realize what they've done. And the beautiful part about the internal conversation happening in your ex's head is it harkens back to that first part of this presentation where I was talking about the 3 points of time: before the breakup, during the breakup, after the breakup. Well, the internal conversation in your head, or your ex is going to have in their head, is really going to focus on that before the breakup point. I'll give you an example. Let's say that you are trying to get me back. We go on a date. Things go really great. We kiss. Everything's going brilliantly. And I say, or make some statement to you about, have you ever thought about getting back together? This, of course, opens the gates for you to try your commitment speech out. I eventually decide, yes, I'm interested in getting back together with you. Yay, we're back together. Then 3 days later, I messaged you and said, hey, I don't think this is going to work out. Well, what happened? Well, throughout those 3 days, I've had time to sit and consider what actually has happened. I've thought back to how things were before the breakup. What was our first relationship like? And I thought all sorts of things. I thought you were very naggy. I thought that you kept flirting with other men, and it made me extremely jealous, and I didn't want to go through that again. And the more I thought, the more the kernel of the idea grew in my head, the more unattractive you became, until eventually my internal conversation, or the internal narrative that I'm having, talks myself out of being with you permanently. That is an issue. And notice how I'm only focusing on the first relationship, what happened before the breakup. So what can you do? Well, what you need to do throughout this process is understand that this internal conversation is really the thing that is going to push you over the edge. You need to understand, what are the headwinds? What are the things that your ex is thinking that will prevent them from wanting to get back together with you? If you cheated on your ex, okay, it's going to probably be cheating. They're going to sit there and think, I'm not going to get back with him or her because they cheated on me. But maybe it's your insecure behavior. Maybe you're so insecure, you need constant reassurance in the relationship that you just get so annoying that I'm sitting there thinking, if I get back with this person, there's no way they're going to change that insecure behavior. They're going to be asking me for reassurance every 5 minutes. Every time I go out, I'm going to get a text message from them demanding to know where I am because they're insecure. Understanding that internal conversation, understanding the headwinds that your ex is going to be thinking about are going to be crucial to helping you understand what needs to be present in your situation if you want your ex to want to come back to you.